We had one last month, and we'll be doing this one today, and then we have one more next month, which we'll talk about at the end of this webinar. But thank you for joining us. And so today we have with us a couple folks from SBFI. They're a console manufacturer for mission critical operation centers located, well, they're a worldwide company, but they are located for the U.S. headquarters in the Asheville area, have multiple facilities in the Southeast from a production perspective. But they're joining us today to provide us with some insight as to, how do you increase the performance of your operators, your staff that man these mission critical facilities with some very effective design, construction, and that include really all of the human factor and ergonomic issues that you need for these folks that are sitting at the consoles hour after hour, day in, day out, to help them be more productive, because there's a lot of science behind this. It's not just office furniture that we're dealing with, standard cubicles. These are fairly specialized pieces of equipment. And so kind of with that, I want to introduce Brandon Scroggs and Jennifer Taylor with SBFI. And what I'll do is I'll turn that over to them in just a second. We will have at the end of this a couple things, and that will be questions. So we'll have a Q&A session at the end, as well as a way to reach out to us that are on this webinar today. And we'll provide you with information about this upcoming webinar for next month, which will be about video walls and visualization technology in mission critical operation centers. So kind of with that, why don't we kick this thing off, and Brandon or Jennifer, I'll turn it over to you and make a quick introduction who you are, and then let's just dive right in.
Hi, everybody. This is Brandon from SBFI.
Hi, and I'm Jennifer Taylor.
Thank you all for taking the time with us today. We really appreciate it. Robert gave us a good intro, but to dive a little bit more into it, kind of head up with his idea. Consoles, a lot of people put it down as equipment that happens in a room, almost as an afterthought. And what we're here today to help folks understand is that it really has a central piece and a lot of questions that you need to know that's going to happen even in some of the early stages of design for a control room. So what we're going to be going over today are some of the basics. Some of you might know some of these, some of it may be new to others, but what we're going to try to provide for you are the exact questions that you need to know to be able to put to your vendors when you're really thinking about these projects, so we can give you kind of a toolkit when you're tackling these projects. To start off with consoles, we're going to be kind of interchanging consoles and desks. Like what Robert had mentioned beforehand, there are more support desks, I guess that you would say, that come into play around manager desks in the back, office desks. We do those as well, and those can be an integral part of a control room, and we'll continue to hit on those. But the majority of what we're going to be focusing on, we're going to call them consoles. Now, a console like the one that you see in the middle here, this is really an operator station. They have a lot more software, a lot more visualization, a lot more customized shape and scope and function of a desk, and then even further into that, team-style desks to fit specific control rooms. So when we mention desk, we're really getting into more office and support roles like you see on the left. When we say consoles, just to give you, like I said, a bit of that vernacular moving forward, we're talking about real operator positions. So that kind of covers the gambit of the type of furniture that we're going to be getting into today. All right.
So we are actually just going to go ahead and jump into some of the key things you need to talk to your vendors about when you're considering the design of your console. Of course, there's the layout and the end users and how everyone works together and sight lines, and we'll get through that through the presentations. But just to get very basic, as Brandon mentioned, one of the big things that come about in a control room today is whether you're going to go with a fixed height solution or you're going to go with a SitStand solution. I would say right now, whether you're back office or your command and control room, most people are going the SitStand route, but if it's their first time transitioning to that fixed to SitStand, there are a lot of things you need to think about when you are going to that transition. So one of the things you would want to ask a vendor if you are going to stick with that fixed height desk is, you know, how versatile is this desk? For example, can the work surface be moved at all? Is it just fixed at a 29-inch height? Is there any versatility there? Or if in a year I want to change to that SitStand console, how easy is that for me to do? Is it going to mess up my operations? What am I going to need to buy? Those type things. Then when you go over to, yes, I am going to the height adjustable desk, there are a few key things that you need to make sure you're asking. One of those, when we talk about SitStand, is are you going with a dual plane, which is when the monitors work independently from the front work surface. And if you look on the right side on your screen, you'll see that dual plane. The other solution that you'll hear with the SitStand is what we call a single plane. And what you'll want to do is you'll want to make sure that you and your vendor are really talking about your equipment and what's being housed in there and how the operator and end user are using the console in the room before you make that decision of whether you're going single or dual. And based off your equipment and how you're working, your vendor should easily be able to tell you which solution to go with.
Hey, Jennifer, this is Robert Cameron here. Hey, I have a couple questions for you about SitStand, right? So you'd mentioned that a lot of users are actually migrating over to a SitStand platform. What's the reasoning behind that? Do you know? Do you have an idea of why more and more people are doing that?
Yes, ergonomics, productivity. There's been study after study after study from being able to go from SitStand. Your end users are more productive. There's less health concerns in the future. Sitting at a console for 12 hours has been proven that it's not good for you. And I would think a lot of the reason people maybe don't migrate to SitStand yet is they don't either understand it, the room's not exactly built for it, or there's a budgetary concern.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
go ahead.
Oh, sorry about that. It's kind of a cliche at this point, but it rings pretty true. Sitting is the new smoking. I hear it basically everywhere that I go. It's especially really prominent when it comes to control rooms as well. In back offices, it's almost like a trend that's kind of caught on. People like the ability to be able to do it, but they're working, 9 to 5. They're not hitting those longer periods of time. When you have someone like a electric distribution operator or a 911 call taker, they cannot leave the station. They can't go on a break. They can't get in the other room. A lot of times they even have to have people cover for them when they go to the restroom. So it's not just a long period of time that they're sitting at these. It's where they cannot move, and having that adjustability really, really focuses in on particularly control room aspects when we get into that.
Yeah, I hear you.
It's really exciting that employers and these companies are taking notice of this and really trying to do what's best for the end user. Robert, even in some of our environments, they don't even stop at the single dual plane. They install individual personnel control environments. So the end user has basically their own heating and air and functionality right there at the console to keep them comfortable.
Wow, that's pretty high tech right there. So, I hear what you're saying, and, the experience that our company has with mission critical, we deal with a lot of consoles and designing mission critical rooms. And I know from our perspective that it's pretty frequent that we're being asked to provide information about, justification of why consoles need to be designed the way they are, and they're certainly a little bit more expensive than your typical office furniture. I think that once you can show and prove the case to the customer of the health benefits and base it on science, because there is science out there about it, and it's not just something that's happened in the last year or two. It's like decades of studies have been done. A lot of customers, kind of see that, and they look at this as an investment in their employees for employee retention, employee health, and I don't know, I may be wrong about this, but I would imagine there's some benefits to a company or an agency, if it's a government agency, about insurance benefits and things like that. So, it's a very important part of, I think, the overall concept of when you're selecting a console. So one of the things that comes to mind for me with SitStand, and I want to point this out to the audience that we have today, is when you're looking at SitStand, you have to really pay close attention to sight lines and viewability of any type of video wall that you might have on the front wall of a room, because what's going to happen is you have 2 rows or 3 rows of operators, dispatchers sitting there, and the front rows or a couple people decide to stand up, and then all of a sudden they're going to block the view of the video wall from a lot of folks. So it's not that you can't use them when you use a video wall. That's not what I'm saying. I'm just saying you have to consider that in the design of the room and or the selection process of which console works best for you in that room.
Yeah, that's a great point, Robert. You absolutely have to do several analysis from sightline, room layout, to consider how each end user is working, the amount of monitors. Are you double stacking them? Are you single tiering them? How high is the video wall from the floor? You do have to consider all those things when you go SitStand. Yeah.
So, with a SitStand, as opposed to a standard console that doesn't have the additional motorized components in it, the reliability, because a lot of people look at, hey, that's just more electronics that can break, right? Well, maybe so, but there are proven studies and tests done on all this stuff. So the actual lifting mechanism that's in a SitStand, just for those that might not be familiar with how SitStand is made, is that a hydraulic? Is it electric? What a pneumatic? What is that lifting mechanism, and what's the estimated life on that type of a component?
Yeah, so there are different kinds of lifting mechanisms. SBFI, and what I see the majority of in control rooms, is electric. Mm-hmm. And it's just leg actuators that have a simple control box and a controller that's connected through cabling, and it powers the legs to then lift the work surfaces up and down. It's actually a pretty simple mechanism, but it does, great things. Yeah.
So it has a pretty long life, reliable life to it.
Yes, it does.
Yeah.
And the good thing is, with the way that our consoles, the way that we design them around the legs, we do design them in the event if one of the legs happen to malfunction, we can come in and easily drop a new leg in. That is another question to consider when you're looking at SitStand and vendors. Some consoles designs, it's not as easy to do that, but that is something that we have changed and improved through the last, 5 or 6 years.
Yeah, that's a good point too. All right, well, I'm sorry I interrupt your presentation, but I'll ask some questions if you don't mind as we go through it.
Oh, absolutely.
No, that's okay. That's definitely what we're here for.
Yeah.
Before we get off this, though, to that point that Jennifer just made, I found that is really important. It seems like SitStand is a non-optional option in the industry nowadays, but you do run into budgetary constraints. Sometimes you can't get absolutely everything you want or the number of consoles, and going SitStand does add a significant amount of cost to a console. She had mentioned it before on the other slide, but that's one thing I really wanted to put home with people thinking about their particular budgets is SitStand is definitely something to go for. The benefits are massively overwhelming, but sometimes you're severely limited to your budget. SBFI, like Jennifer mentioned, does design these consoles, our stationary consoles, around the ability to just drop legs in them to convert them over to SitStand. So that is definitely something, not just with us, but with any of your vendors when you're looking into consoles themselves. What is the ease of use to convert if you have to stick with stationary, but you're thinking in the future that you may want to switch to SitStand? So definitely a good question to keep in mind. All right. The next part that we're going to talk about is some of the equipment that really goes on the desk. There's lots of shapes and sizes that we see. We've been to expos. We've been in a number of different industries so far. We've seen trends in each of them. Some folks like 90-degree desks, others like straight desks. There's a lot of preconceived notions about what people like from the different shapes, but the question that you really need to be asking your vendors and thinking about is, what specifically does the console do? What exactly is the operations that you're looking for? So the two most important things when picking the size and shape, when picking the area that you're going to get into, would be the monitors on the top. How many are you using? What are they displaying? Can any of them be used to display multiple software so you can consolidate or not? And then, even more importantly, the PC storage. Going from left to right, you can kind of see a gambit of some of the projects that we've worked on. Folks that have small form factor PCs that are just simply running the monitors at the desk and then doing, server-based equipment for some of their secure PCs can go with smaller frame desks like the one on the left. Folks that need PCs at their desk can get them on rollable trolleys. It expands the desk a bit, but doesn't really change the frame that much. When you get on the very far right, the picture that we're looking at, that's when there's a heavy amount of equipment involved. It's not just your PCs and the fact that they're tower PCs. If you're putting UPS systems in there, if you're putting radio controllers, if you're adding more and more equipment, that really dictates the size and shape of console that you're getting into. So we keep hitting on this idea of questions to note when you're looking into these projects. That's got to be one that you discuss directly with your vendor. These are the displays that we're going to have. This is the functionality that the console needs to produce, and then from there, they should be able to give you sizes and shapes and custom-built furniture that fits the exact uses that you're looking for.
Right. Hey, so can I ask you, because I think you may be talking about it here too, Brandon, but I know a lot of our customers are moving away from what we define as local PC or technology, i.e. in a cabinet right at the console, and they're virtualizing a lot of the software and applications they use. Are you seeing that trend too?
We're seeing a number of trends, actually. There are more and larger monitors. People are considering 4K and even 8K at this point, which is kind of funny, but really detailed stuff. It's more video enhanced at the desk. PCs in themselves are actually getting smaller, moving from large towers to form factors. Smaller PCs can maintain more and larger monitors. And then, yes, just like you said, actually going with a KVM system where you're pumping in a lot of your software, a lot of your visuals, a lot of the stuff that your operators are actually working on. It needs to be separate from the room, and it needs to be in a secure location like a server room. So all three of those trends are stuff that we're definitely seeing happen across the board in every industry, from electric utilities to emergency operations, airports, and the like.
Gotcha. Yeah. Gotcha.
So there's a couple things on this slide. One is, of course, looking into bookcases and filing systems and storage all across your room, making sure that your vendor can accommodate those requests, whether it be at the console or around the room. You'll see on the right side of this slide is what we call a PC cabinet. This is another trend, Robert, that we are seeing. In some of our control room industries specifically, such as maybe 911, they are used to putting their PCs on the outside of the console. One reason is they can access it typically from the front and the back easier. Another is that front work surface in a 911 center or a control room oftentimes have guidelines on the height adjustable. You're having to bring it down to a certain height. So they push these PCs on the outside, but what that does is it takes up your real estate and causes other points of failure. Now, some rooms are designed that that's the way we need to do things. So other rooms that allow you, and the functionality of the equipment and the console allow you to put the PCs within the console's base, like the slides that Brandon showed you previously. That really allows your cable management to stay tidy, to eliminate points of failure, and to save real estate within the room, and allow you to be able to build these special storage, filing cabinets, lockers, whatever it may be that the end user needs. We can do it any way that you would like, just depending on the room.
Another thing to add to that as well, Robert, is when you go with furniture like this, where you have PCs that are on the outside as opposed to being able to collect in your consoles, you either have limited space with a smaller room to begin with, so it is limiting the number of consoles that you can get, but also the ADA walk path compliancy of having that 1.5 foot space to be able to get around these consoles. If you're taking extra space with putting PCs off board, you're encroaching into those paths, so you have to take that in certain areas, and especially when it comes to limited control room setups, if it's going to be a decision of, do we get another console in as a training console or as a backup when we have an emergency, or do we go where we have these PCs on the outside? I've seen those times and times again where those are actual decisions that need to be made. So that's another good question to ask your vendor. If you've got all of the space in the world, and like Jennifer said, there are very real applications for electronics outside of the desks, we have options for all of those type of things. But more often than not, the budget is a bit more constrained, so it would make sense to purchase less furniture, and the space is more constrained. So finding a way to consolidate that equipment within the desk, we found, is kind of another one of those trends that a lot of people are moving to because it's more convenient and it's cheaper.
And I think what really started this trend, and I think Brandon mentioned it earlier, is the monitors are getting larger. So the console itself, where the end user is sitting, is getting larger. The worktops are getting larger. So being able to incorporate the equipment within that larger footprint is helping save real estate. So that is a topic of discussion that everybody should have with their vendor.
Yeah, so, there are a couple things I'm taking away from this particular slide, and that is, one, early on, Jennifer, you guys had talked about markets. So, like you referenced, I think it was 911. So I know you guys do business with, like, a variety of different type of marketplaces, and that would include security operations or a NOC, a network operations center, and obviously the public safety side, which is your EOC and 911, are all these different markets that you're working, and you guys even do stuff on trading floors, right? Financial institutions. In fact, that may be where you got your start, right? But are you finding that there are a lot of differences in the requirements that these different markets have as it relates to this cabinet and offloading PCs like this and or a SitStand, or are you finding there's a lot of similar requirements, and so there's a lot of consistency between markets?
There's actually both. I know that's not really answering your question, but what I mean by that is, in every control room, I do see a lot of similarities from the end user to the equipment. But from the industry to industry, I think a lot of times it's what the industry's been used to, if that makes sense. There's sort of a trend in that particular sector. It's not always how I think that they should work when I go in there, so that is something that we will analyze. It's just, hey, this is how we've done it for the last 15 years.
Yeah.
So this is what we're used to, and this is what we know. That's more of what I see than the actual having to be completely different in each industry.
Gotcha.
Yeah, Robert, a good example of that is nuclear power plants, and even other older, like coal generation plants themselves. They'll have one large console that an operator sits at, but they have different, what they call, stations at each of them. Stations themselves pertain to a particular turbine. So they're powering up turbine 1, they're powering down turbine 2. You'll have the operator at a very large desk, and they will scoot around in their chair, and they have a separate mouse and keyboard at every single station. However, it is one desk and it is one operator. The exact thing could be done that Jennifer's talking about. If we KVM the system and we had one mouse and one keyboard that was controlling different monitors that we could switch to, I see that a lot more in other industries. Emergency operations has really taken a lot onto that. You barely see them with 7 or 8 keyboards anymore. They've really consolidated down on it. It's not that either way is necessarily wrong. It's just what Jennifer was mentioning, that there are differences in industries because of what they've been used to, and they may have had a lot of very specialized purposes in the past. Like, it makes sense to have a different keyboard for a different turbine so you're not powering up the wrong thing. But a lot of the trends that we keep noticing of larger monitors, smaller PCs, moving to offboarding equipment and all that, each industry is taking it at their own pace, but they can all do that. So a lot of the differences that I know I see, at least personally, are just like Jennifer said. It's just what they're used to.
Yeah. Yeah, well, that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. Right. Yeah. When it comes to faults that I've seen, and not necessarily faults, just stumbling blocks from people that have never done a project like this before, I constantly run into people that consider consoles like another piece of equipment that goes into a room. This really ties into the summary that we had at the beginning. Architects will build the building. The finance people will write the budgets. Only once the building is built and the room is done and, electricity is even in the room, do people consider, start putting up video panels and consoles and picking things like what color carpet that we want to get into. This, I would say, is the number one mistake that I've ran into, and specifically around consoles because of how involved this is. You and Jennifer have kind of hit on this already with a few things. Sight lines from a desk, and this is just a good example. If you're going to have a video wall up and you're also going to be interested in SitStand consoles, once you raise the console up to a certain level, it's now blocking your video wall. So they're two completely separate pieces of equipment. They're usually thought at towards the end of the project, and I've seen people who run into spending lots of money on a video wall that now can't see it because they also wanted SitStand consoles. Getting to my point in this, the time frame that you need to be considering consoles is very, very early in the project. It is the largest piece of equipment that goes in the room. That, along with the ADA requirement walk paths that you need to have around these consoles, do make it take up the vast majority of any room. All of the equipment is housed in these, and very subtle things like, are we going to have acoustic panels? Is this operator going to need to talk to that operator through a radio? What are the sight lines going to be for the overhead video that we're looking into? All of that can be discussed on the front end, on the very front end, even with an architect, in how to lay out a room. Architects are very good at building buildings or renovating existing buildings. And I've seen plenty of them where they've even got a bit of skill in, placing desks, and they've got a number of them that are in there, but they don't understand, like, particular console vendors, some of the little nuances that go into this stuff. So that's the one issue that I would really guard against when it comes to people looking into these projects is get your console vendor involved early, at least to where they can provide an overhead display. They can do some of these renderings. They can think about all the nuances of the placement and where this equipment's going to go, so you don't run into an oops moment where it needs to be a change order. Or I've even ran into customers that had to cut down on the number of consoles that they were even going to put in the room because, they wanted an extra training one, or they were planning for the future to expand, but because of everything they found they needed to put in the desk, it was just not going to allow them space-wise. So another one of those questions that we keep hitting on to always ask your vendors and to be thinking about is, how well do you work in design? Can you provide us overhead drawings and spatial drawings, and exactly what we can do at this stage to make these decisions before we're locked into the size room and we're locked into the size budget that we really need. The last thing in the world you want is either being stuck with these consoles for 10 to 15 years, because these are generally the lifetimes of these, or are we going to have to go with a change order, and is someone going to be in trouble for what we're doing? So design, when it comes to consoles, is not just the design of the console. That's the mistake that most people make. When it comes to designing with consoles, it's how they fit in the space of the room as well, and that needs to be an early stage discussion.
That's a great point. Hey, I have a question for you. Say that consoles typically have a 10 to 15 year lifetime or lifespan. So, it would, for me, if that's the case, then that would mean that the materials that are used to build these, are a little bit different maybe in quality than the materials that might be used for a traditional workstation or cubicle or office furniture or something to that effect. What is the norm, if you will, if there is such a norm, or what do you guys do? I don't want this to seem like to the attendees that it's an infomercial, but I'm just curious more than anything, what type of materials play into that longevity of a product like this? I mean, the work surfaces, are they made of a special type of material? The components, is it a steel structure, powder coated? What makes it last 10 to 15 years?
That's a great question, Robert. And to start off with the first question is, yes, your consoles should be using different materials than probably your systems furniture, because we are warranting these consoles for 10 to 15 years. And to be honest, any reputable vendor that someone is speaking to should also be using these types of materials, and probably are, especially if they are also offering a 10 to 15 year warranty. If you see a console vendor offering a very short warranty, I would look into it further. I would look into the type of materials they're using, investigate just a little bit more. To your question on what types of materials we do use the steel power-coated special antibacterial laminate on the work surface. We use polyurethane edging so that the edging of the work surface is, never peel off. And we, as SBFI, we actually make all of these things in-house. We cut all our extrusions. We paint everything. We have our own wood facility. So we're able to really control the quality of the materials and the consoles being designed. But I do believe that materials are what gives the longevity of the console.
Yeah, I would think so.
Not just the length of time that you're going to be having these pieces of equipment, specifically with control rooms, it's also the constant use.
Mm-hmm.
Someone claiming they have a commercial grade SitStand desk that's an office worker, they probably have one of the very desks that's able to raise it up and down, and it has all the benefits that we've talked about, but they're 9 to 5, like we mentioned. Many of the control room projects that we're involved in have multiple shifts, and it's a 24/7 operation. So to last not only 15 years, but at 24/7 use, you're never going to see anything in desks like we offer or our competitors offer that are at that level that have fiberboard or anything like that. They just don't stand the test of time and the punishment that some of these desks can take. So to Jennifer's point exactly, warranty is a very important question to ask. And if it is less than a 10-year warranty, there is a reason for that, and it's something to look into.
Yeah, good point. Good point.
All right. Okay.
So this next slide is, I just touched on it a little bit on the previous slide about SBFI. As Robert mentioned, we are located in the Southeast, but we are a global company and we make the entire console. The owner of SBFI also owns a metal workshop, a paint shop, a timber shop, plant. So everything is vertically integrated. We're able to control quality, we're able to control cost, and the fact that we're actually a true global manufacturer with manufacturing facilities in the UK, Asia, and in the US, we're really able to look at the command and control room environment globally. We're able to see the trend We're seeing what's happening in Asia. We're seeing what's happening in the UK with the ergonomics there. We're able to see it as a whole unit. And every year, we all get together in one place, the company globally. We sit and we talk about the trends. What's company? What are you seeing across the world? And we really try to gather this data to make each area, the US, Asia, and the UK, the best product that we can make. But here in the US, we are actually just out of Asheville, North Carolina. So every piece of furniture coming out in the US is made out of that facility.
So you custom build everything, or do you have components already, on the shelf, and you're just going to build based on components that are already cut to size?
So we build custom.
Okay.
We do everything. We cut our extrusions in-house. We make our own arms. We make our own data and convenience power units. I think one of the only things we don't make is the actuator, the leg, the SitStand leg. Those are purchased, and then we design the console to be able to drop those in.
Mm-hmm. Gotcha.
But yeah, and that really allows us. I know a lot of people say they're custom, but with how the company is set up, and the owner owning all the specific entities and being vertically integrated, it really does make customization very easy for us.
Nice. So let me ask you this. So given you're showing a global presence here, kind of curious, I asked it earlier about the market. So were there any differences or nuances for what a 911 facility is requesting in a dispatch console versus a power utility, for example? Do you find that globally, like the requirements we have here in the United States are very similar, identical to those they'd have in Asia or Australia, or are there some nuances and differences? And I know there are probably some only because of, compliance with some local codes or ADAs or whatever they may have, because ADA is not an international standard that I'm aware of. Maybe it is. But are there differences in requirements around the world?
Yeah, there are differences, and I think you hit on it with compliance. But what we see is we sort of take the information and data that we gather from our different sectors, and we try to compile it into a product that makes a all-around good product. And what I mean by that is, what we learn in Asia is the buildings being older and hotter, heat management in these environments are very, very important. And so we take what we learn from those environments, bring them to the U.S., and focus on the heat management, making sure all the equipment's cool, and that's built within the console. And then, for example, in Europe, in the UK, they always seem to be ahead ergonomically. So a lot of times we'll follow those guidelines to look. I mean, the UK, they were doing SitStand way before we were. And then here in the U.S., like our monitor arm system, we learned that everybody in the U.S. seems to want everything fast. So we made a toolless, fast monitor arm system for, when the screens need to be moved around or when the CPUs need to be pulled out. When IT comes, we tried to create a console where it's as toolless as possible and easy for IT and facilities to navigate any problems that should be on the floor during that time.
Gotcha. That's interesting.
Yeah, one of the things that I've noticed from a lot of our overseas projects, different different countries themselves don't really have everything as dispersed as the United States. They have national organizations that handle ambulance services. They have national organizations that handle electric utilities, especially countries that are much smaller than the United States. They're not as divided. So most of the time with those, you'll get much larger rooms on scales of hundreds of consoles in a room. And there's a lot less ability for customization. There's kind of a standard that they stick to, and that's it. Australia is the example that I'm bringing up, or that I'm thinking about at the moment. All of their 911 call centers are actually handled by the Queensland Ambulance Service for the entire country. So they have a few people that make a decision, and then it's pushed out. It's very cheap for them to do that, and it's easy because they can buy in bulk, but there's a very low level of customization. The nice thing about what we find in the United States is that most large municipalities have their own traffic, energy, 911. Every county in a state has their own 911. They have a smaller, more agile team to be able to fit the very specifics of the area that they're in. So customization is something that we really get into a bit more in the United States in terms of exactly the shape, what exact functionality is going on, just because they don't have a lot of these larger facilities that some of the smaller countries have.
Yeah, I get it. That's interesting. So, you know, a lot of lessons I'm sure you guys have learned over the years because you've done work all over the world and you kind of incorporate that into new designs and things like that. So that's cool. So, you know, I know we're at about 45 minutes, which is what we typically, you know, kind of run our way. Do you have anything else in terms of your content? Are we reaching the end?
Actually, that was the end.
Oh, well, look at that. Yeah. So that slide I don't think is supposed to be there. That's okay. It's relevant in many ways. And the reason it's relevant is, you know, this was a slide I think that was left over from our previous webinar. And basically why it's relevant is that all these things apply, you know, in terms of the control room. Is look at the control room not as just, you know, a video wall or consoles or just a room. You got to look at it as an ecosystem because everything has to work together, whether it's the consoles, the monitor on the consoles, the video wall, the lighting, everything. And which kind of brings us down to, you know, having to look at the science behind it to make sure people have the right, you know, sight lines and viewing angles and, you know, the SitStand features from a human factor ergonomic issue. And I think, Brandon, you brought this up actually a little while ago, is about start early and start asking a lot of questions of the architect and the team about what the expectations are for the room. And it doesn't matter if it's a small room or a very large room, it's all relevant, right? And I think, you know, certainly not in self-promotion here of your company or ours, but, you know, certainly that's why we're in business, is to help folks that may be on this call or others out there, customers that have worked with us in the past, is to bring our expertise to the table. And so kind of with that, you know, we'll wrap it up a little bit. We do have another webinar coming up in August. If you want to flip to the next slide. This one is the last in the series of 3 that we are having this summer. We'll be having more in the fall, but the next one will be a very similar structure to what this was, and it'll be about video walls and visualization technology. And so that's real important, again, tying into the whole concept of the ecosystem. So, you know, look, why don't we just kind of go to the next slide real quick, which is really the way to reach either myself or Jennifer. If anybody on the webinar today has a specific question or an interest or even a project that they need some help with, we'd love to help them with that. But as we close out, Lisa, let me bring you into the conversation and find out if you had any questions that came in while we were having our discussion.
Yes, thank you. Absolutely. A few have come in. First one is, what things should be considered going from fixed height to a SitStand?
Oh, okay. Let me go back to the slide, fixed height and SitStand. There are several things that should be considered, and I think one of the things that we really touched on is the layout of the room and sight lines and the monitor configuration. That's a very, very important factor. One other thing I think people tend to forget about is the cable management. Oftentimes when you go from a fixed to a SitStand, you are going to need longer video cables, power cables. You're going to have to consider the route of cables from the top to the bottom of the PCs to ensure there's no point of failure. And you want to ensure that the cables and everything is very tidy and put in there just right so you're not pinching the cables as they're coming down and interfering with any of the data. That's probably the most important things that I would touch base on if you were looking to go from fixed to SitStand.
Great, and that just kind of leads right into the next question. Are there safety concerns with SitStand for fingers or cables?
Oh, that is a great question. If you cable the console correctly, which if you will need to ask a vendor, do they help or show you how to cable those consoles, because it's very important up front. You should not have a pinched cable. Another thing is in the leg, or at least in SBFI's legs, we have something called piezo, which is an anti-collision. So if the console work surface were to lower down, let's say on a coffee cup or anything, it would signal the legs to stop. And you would have to remove the object before the console would move again. And as far as pinching fingers, then, you know, oftentimes in control rooms, you're not always right together, but let's say that in one particular configuration, you have users right beside of each other, and the work surface is maybe end user 1's going up and end user 2's down. We do analysis and make sure that we incorporate pinch points so that pinched fingers don't occur. So we take those precautions to make sure that nothing like that happens.
Awesome. Okay. And just one more question so far, but please, everyone, you know, you're welcome to go ahead and put some more questions in as you have them. But this one, because I remember you had talked about migration to server rooms as a current trend. So someone's asking, what happens if our equipment is in a server room?
Definitely. And here, let me move over for an example like that.
Okay.
What we were talking about beforehand with equipment being essential to the layout of the console, this keeps rolling into the same thing that I'm building up of ask questions early and design around it. If you have to have PCs that are secure, that are not out on your corporate database, be it SCADA for electric utilities, be it some of the 911 software for emergency operations, that takes the equipment out, so any of the PCs that you can see here, and it mounts them into racks, into server rooms that can then be piped into the room. You wouldn't want to purchase the console on the right here with all of the space and capability to put many PCs and UPS and all that in there if the majority of your equipment is going to be outside of the room. So those are the questions that we talk to the architect about in particular of, do we need a server room? How far can the server room be away from it? A lot of people don't understand that 50 feet away for not even just a coax cable, but an HDMI cable to pull data from a server room to a control room will significantly degrade a lot of the video quality that we're looking at. So those type of questions should be asked early and often on where the equipment's going to go, not only to line up where a server room is, in what conjunction and what wall does it touch the control room on, are we going to be able to punch through it for the video wall, and then how do we connect raised floor to the consoles? But then that very question pulls up, well, if we don't have the equipment in the consoles and we're putting it in the server room, what size console do we need to fit our exact operations? So yeah, that question is a multi-tiered question involving the size and shape of consoles, but even the size and shape of the building, and just lends us again to this, we need to be talking about this equipment because it is so integral to every other part of the control room at the very beginning of a project.
Great. Okay, well, that's it for the questions that I've seen come in. If I might add, though, we've got a few guests that did join a little bit late, so you might want to put those email addresses back up for their benefit. Following the webinar, everyone will get a message that'll come through from Cisco WebEx, and in that will be a link for our next webinar, but you'll also get Robert's email in there, and you could reach out to him if you are interested in getting a recording of today's session if you did miss some of it.
Definitely.
Oh,
And I believe
I got some more questions that have come through. Hold on one second.
Yeah, I saw that too.
Okay. Yeah. Hold on one second. Let's see. All right. So what about the PDUs? Does the console come with PDUs?
I'm sorry, what's the term PDU? What are we discussing with that?
Well, that I don't know.
Oh.
Well, so there's a follow-up that says, are they complying to ISO 11064 for control room? Oh, so PDU is power distribution unit. My apologies.
Oh, okay. Yes, we've actually had a number of clients ask for those specifics. There's a electric utility company that we're dealing with here in North Carolina that's had there we go. Okay. Sorry about that. We just changed over. Requests currently having problems. Okay, yeah, when it comes to those specific requirements, we can design consoles with the circuits to fit, what we're looking at with those standards. We've had, hold on one moment. Okay. Yeah, even going down to things with like UL electrical certifications, those are a lot of questions that we ask in the beginning to be able to design the desks around it. Because we build custom and from the ground, we can fit a lot of those specifications, and we do testing for those as well.
Okay. And then he's saying the 11064 and other ISO standards for ergonomics and 24/7 work duty in mission-critical control rooms.
Yes, that would be some of the fixed height that we're dealing with. What is the lowest height that we reach to be able to fit those?
26. It depends on whether you're single and dual, but yes, we follow the guidelines. In some industries, they want the dual plane frontwork surface to go down to 22, but we can also go down to 26 and fit the biggest CPUs into the console.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I think that's the end of the questions. Thank you.
Nice. Thank you for the question. We appreciate that.
Okay, so it sounds like it's a wrap, as they say. So look, everybody, thank you for joining us today, and Jennifer, Brandon, and Lisa, thanks for helping out there. But appreciate your participation, and let's look forward to the next one in August.
Great. Thanks, everyone, for your time today. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
Bye-bye now.